effective humanitarian response, it's essential that the needs of women and men, girls and boys be taken into consideration. And this is the basis of where we're starting for this presentation. Just for those of you who maybe don't know the DRC, a bit of information. As of June 2011, it was estimated that the IDP population was around 1.6 million, about 800,000 returnees and 120,000 host families. Women, girls in the DRC bear the primary burden for household activities necessary to the survival and well-being of the families. And on top of this continual movement of populations, conflict and natural disasters, there's also a dysfunctional and non-existent infrastructure throughout the country, which makes it one of the world's most humanitarian emergencies, and it means that a lot of people don't receive the aid that they're required or that would be possibly available to them. So, outline of the content of this presentation, I'm going to look further into some of the challenges that we have in terms of addressing gender, and then go through what we've done as a cluster to try and address these issues. Specifically at the education situation in the DRC, as you can see there, girls are 14% less likely to attend primary school than boys. They're 16% less likely to complete primary school. And only between the attendance and the completion, you can see the difference in rates. There's also 19% less likely to go to secondary school and to finish it. And here, again, the issue is serious because there are only 34.6% of boys going to secondary school and 16% of girls. There are only 7% of primary school teachers who are female. 1 man is literate, and only 1 out of 2 women. And then the major issue is violence and sexual exploitation in schools, and all the risks on the way to school and within the communities. So, when I was in the DRC 2.5 years ago, this I found statements like 2,000 children, 50% girls are reintegrated into an accelerated learning program. And immense responses regarding whether gender is taken into consideration was, well, it's way gender sensitive in our programs. We always make sure that there are 50% targeted. Taking the needs of girls and boys into consideration just by having statements like the following. And here I really want to reiterate what Siobhan and Jane Cap, advisor with the Global Cluster, said. A recent document she really emphasizes having to go beyond this. So, with the support of the Gen Cap, who was at the time housed within UNICEF in the DRC, we considered the other clusters. We want to see the WASH cluster, and what they've done is they've established 5 gender standards for emergency WASH programming, and they've used the cluster as a strategic entry point. They also developed female hygiene kits, and they've institutionalized with their partners the whole concept of gender and making sure that the gender standards were integrated into all contracts. The food item cluster, they again had used the technique of having minimum engagements, 6 minimum engagements, and you can see on the slide there the 6 they chose. And they have a cash-based voucher and NFI assistance program, and that there's a robust component therein. The protection cluster and more particularly the child protection working group, they've done a lot of work on training with partners on how to do better analysis, how to conduct discussion groups with possible beneficiaries, with leaders within the community, and they'd also put in place a better monitoring system. And you can actually find an example of the work done by the child protection working group in the INEE pocket guide on gender. French version, it's page 13. It was demystifying gender, because what we found is that out of many cost-cutting themes, they become this big white elephant that nobody knows what to do with. And so what we do show cluster members was that it was all about listening, to tell you what they need, what they suggest. Second part of this whole demystifying was to move away from thinking about gender as equaling girls. It's about taking into consideration the needs and what the sort of girls and boys, women and men, and also recognizing what each one of these groups can provide in terms of a response. Third step was defining our own engagement. So taking the same model that the non-food item and wash clusters used. And initially, the 3 main questions were: what are the barriers to girls receiving an education? What are the barriers to boys receiving an education? And then what are solutions to these barriers for both girls and boys? And we came up with a list of about 10 different engagements or commitments. We sent those out to each of the clusters. In the DC, we have 16 clusters and subclusters. So really fastidious and long work in trying to get the feedback from all of the different cluster members. But eventually we managed to bring these, it was about 10 to 15 on the initial list, down to 5. And this is what you can see here, the 5 engagements or 5 commitments for education cluster members. And the first is to guarantee the dignity and protection of girls and boys through the separation of latrines by sex. This is awareness raising of communities to take into consideration the specific barriers to education for girls and boys. The third is encouraging an equal representation of men and women during the recruitment of teachers and parent committee members. Establishing listening points within schools and communities is the fourth. And the fifth one is raising awareness of mothers and fathers regarding the retention of adolescent girls and boys in schools beyond primary education. And the step, creating these engagements. What were the results? Great, we've got disaggregated data. It's a step in the right direction because we have latrines for girls and boys. This most members found the easiest of engagements to commit to. But the not so great was the fact that people were just copying and pasting our engagements into their project documents under a theme cross-cutting, under the section cross-cutting themes, which means that there was or very little real appropriation of these engagements. Our next step was to create harmonized cluster MA tools and reporting indicators. And here, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, I've always indicated what tools and documents we refer to when creating these tools of our own. And here the cluster came up with 5 different tools. 3 of them quantitative. There you can see an example of one, and then 2 using the examples from Haiti Education Cluster on how to conduct focus groups and getting information from personnel from the schools, from girls, from boys, from teachers, etc. And the idea with creating these harmonized tools was to show members that if they do the right initial evaluation or assessment of needs, using these tools, they will have the data that is necessary for them to then propose interventions which take into consideration the needs of girls and boys, women and men. Un tigre ne vend pas sa tigritude. This is the phrase now of the GenCap who is currently in the DRC, this time housed at OCHA. The whole idea behind this expression, which means if a text is written well, I mean, if I extrapolate, if a text is written well, you don't need to have a paragraph explaining what we're doing in terms of gender. So this is where we're trying to move away from having to have actions on cross-cutting themes to try and make people understand that they can show the integration of gender through the actions that they are proposing. And unfortunately, this is often linked to formats of donors where they ask for a specific section where you have to explain how you take gender into consideration and the environment into consideration and HIV/AIDS. And in fact, this is fairly counterproductive in making sure that there is a real integration of these themes. Step is reinforcing the capacities of cluster members. And here just an example of how we conduct our trainings is we always make them very practical. We start off by giving cluster members a context and then asking them to propose activities. The context is very general, but kind of always manage to propose some kind of activities, but then ask them to explain or justify why they've proposed these actions, realize that in fact they do need to do more collection of data. And that's the moment, the aha moment, and that's an expression I'm stealing from our non-formal non-food item. So they always talk about the aha moment. So we have our first aha moment. It allows us to work through the quantitative and quality data collection tools that the cluster has, make everyone familiar with them. We then give the next set of data that we pretend we've collected, and then now to revisit their initial activity. So again, you have the second aha. Now I can propose more appropriate and adapted activities which take into consideration the different needs of girls and boys, women, men. And hopefully, as they explore that, they'll have their third aha moment They realize that often the solutions needed do not themselves within the education sector, but they need to go to the other sectors to find solutions. For example, if we go back to the example that I mentioned in the INEE pocket guide on gender on page 13, there one of the big questions was, hold on, that these adolescent girls want to join our discussion groups, they will express this, we put them in place and none of them are coming. When went back to ask them why they're not coming, they realized it was because the time slots that they'd put in place were at the same time that the girls are having to walk kilometers and kilometers to fetch water. So apart from an initial phase changing the times, the main issue is that maybe there is a well that's needed in this village so that these girls aren't having to walk for hours to go and collect water. So kind of getting them to think along these lines. One of the major barriers to education is the financial one. Parents aren't able to pay the fees that are required. And so we need to be looking for partnerships in terms of income generation activities. The next step in these trainings is working with the partners on how to write a proposal, and we also introduce them to what the humanitarian action plan is, what the education cluster strategy is within the plan. In DC, as an education cluster, we've come up with our own Bible, our own guidelines, the document that I'm happy to share with anybody if they're interested, and use this opportunity to introduce them to all of these tools that we have. Also, by introducing them to the tools, we hope that this is the fourth. In fact, there's a lot of background information and tools that already exist that I don't have to go create myself. So it reduces this whole stress and burden around trying that many partners have in writing proposals. Once they've written their proposals, we then use the Adapter Agir tool to test whether an integrated and holistic process that's been undertaken. And then we introduce them to the gender markers, and we ask each group to give themselves a gender mark. First, we're introducing them to, one, the cluster tools, and two, showing them how gender is not something apart, but very much integrated into the work of the cluster. The sixth step is doing cluster field visits to monitor implementation. We created another cluster tool for project monitoring, and I stress monitoring and not evaluation, because here is that members of the cluster will go onto the field, we'll see how they can support the other cluster member who's implementing the project to improve what they're doing, and also for them to put themselves in the shoes of the partner to say, okay, if I was implementing, how would I have done it, and what would the possible problems I have had in implementing this project. So that's a learning by observing process. Also, we have a pool fund, a common humanitarian fund here, and we also ask different cluster members to join the pool fund evaluators when they do their field missions, also as a way to try and build capacities. to summarize and conclude, the idea is start small and at a program level with concrete quick wins, building up from evidence-based analysis and concrete change. So strong field analysis, always ensure recommendations are simple and concrete and manageable for partners. To make sure that you always get to that aha point so that people feel that yes, we can do this, so that you have this catalytic effect or multiplicator effect. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. That was Tracy Sprott with the Education Cluster on gender-sensitive approaches to improve the effectiveness of education programming for the INEE Education Cluster webinar on gender-responsive programming.